Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Development Diaries. This is a show where we interview leaders, innovators, change makers, movers and shakers from across the real estate development sector, learning about their career journeys, proudest moments, lessons learned along the way, and advice to their younger you. We also find out what excites them most about the real estate sector right now. I'm your host, John Guest, founder of Henry James Search and the Rebels Community, a group of good humans in real estate who come together to move the industry forward and challenge the status quo. On this episode of Development Diaries, I'm delighted to be joined by James Coulsey, co-founder and director of Trigon DM. Trigon are a development management consultancy focused on simplifying complex development processes and helping clients deliver projects with clarity, precision, and confidence. They have a track record across lots of different sectors, including mixed-use master plans, office, resi for sale, PRS, co-living, student, last mile logistics, retail and leisure, as well as development assurance. And they're also a proud B Corp. James, welcome to Development Diaries. A pleasure to have you with us today. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be here.
I'm excited to get stuck into your journey. I'm sure the listeners are too. It would be great to find out some of your lessons learned along the way and what's coming next. So shall we dive in?
Yeah, sounds good.
Cool. So we like to start the show by going back a little bit, a couple of years at least, to the beginning of your career. So could you share with the listeners a little bit more about how you ended up in the wonderful world of real estate? Was it written in the stars, or were there a few sliding doors moments along the way?
Yeah, I was thinking about this, and I think it was probably more written in the stars than I actually believed at the time. Both my parents have got background in engineering. Mum was a chemical engineer. Dad was a fire risk engineer. And I always loved maths and science at schools, mainly because they didn't make you do as many essays as the other subjects at school. So I assumed that there was some sort of engineering in the future, looking back on that. But I spent a week with my uncle on for a careers week from school, and he's a civil engineer out on site, and I thought that's a great thing to do. Actually, you're outside, seeing stuff, solving problems. It was a really nice week actually up in Leeds, which then set me on the way to civil engineering. And I got a great course at Loughborough with a sandwich year, which I'd highly recommend to anybody, no matter what career you're into. That ability to do a couple of years at university and then spend a year actually putting stuff into practice. I spent a year on site in Watford, building some offices, and just that bit of seeing what you've done in that week, in built form, physical, you could touch it, was really amazing. And actually that camaraderie on site was really cool. And that kind of just set me into, yep, this is me, this is where I'll be. And being able to just point at buildings that you've been a part of building was a great thing to be able to look at, I think.
And could you talk us a little bit more about how those sliding doors moments developed, how your career progressed, and how you transitioned into development?
Yeah, so I did about just over 10 years on site, worked through from site engineer on site through to project leader. And it was just before Brexit vote, so 2016. I was trying to work out what to do next. I was getting I wasn't enjoying site-based stuff as much. It wasn't quite where I wanted to be, and I was trying to work out what the next step was. And when you're on site, you understand what you're building and how you're building it, but you don't really understand why you're building it and what the background of that decision making to build an office in this part of London is. And that was a bit I thought I was missing a little bit of. So I spent a bit of time talking to a few friends and talking to a few people in the industry, and had a few coffees after being introduced to some different people, talking about the future and whether that was in a different industry or in the same industry but a different role. It was really interesting actually at that point. And fortunately, I got an intro into a company called Queensbury Real Estate, who effectively took a chance on a guy on a builder, I suppose. At that point, their logic, the very words out the development director at the time's mouth was, if you know how to build, we can teach you the rest. If you know the nuts and bolts of buildings, we can teach you the rest. And they spend a lot of time working through development finance, development modeling, financial modeling, understanding that kind of thought process at the start. How do we work through what people want to live in or work in? Or how do we create spaces in towns that people want to be part of? Um, it was a great grounding in development, going through from that stage, and we kind of transitioned into a development manager there, and did all sorts of different bits and pieces. So I got a huge amount of experience from working with those guys. So yeah, it was pretty sliding doors, be able to get into that space and someone be able to say, "Yep, I can take a chance on you, and I can trust that you can deliver a building. Um, Let me just work on that early stages."
What did you feel were the hardest parts of that transition? Were there parts that were really easy to pick up and others that took a little bit longer looking back?
Um, yeah, the it's you've got to have enough confidence in yourself to be able to ask daft, in inverted commas, questions. Um, and if you can do that enough, you can work out the development modeling stuff. The harder bit is really understanding how people interact with space, and understanding how who you need to talk to and how you can shape space and shape developments to really make sure that people, that it's not just a load of blocks, it's actually this kind of journey that you're taking people through, whether it's an office, whether it's a master plan, whether it's whatever it is, you're creating a journey through that piece of real estate, and really understanding how to brief that into a design team is really hard.
So going from site to then working in development to then learning kind of the front end and why we're doing it in the first place, and as you said, curating places, placemaking. How did that then progress on to more senior role there? And can you tell us a bit more about how Trigon came about?
Yeah, Andy and I are working together, have been working together on various roles for a long time. So we worked on sites together, um, pouring concrete on Saturday mornings, through to working together at Queensbury for a while. Andy moved across to a different company, B More, to try and to work into that sector of more development-led schemes, and we ended up in a place where we were trying to work out how would we how could we help people in a different way, and how can we use our experience of being able to be builders, developers, and development managers, and how can we help clients? Is there a way for us to do that? And we effectively um, created Trigon off the back of that. We'd be a little bit different, understand how to build, and understand how to unlock finance in it by using an ESG conversation in a better way. Um, so we effectively set Trigon up to do that. So how do we build differently? How do we help asset owners do the bit they like, which is go buy the next asset, and become the people that can deliver it for them?
And what have been some of your proudest achievements to date when you look back on your career? Can you pin it down to one or two? Is that too difficult? What would the highlights really include if we were on match of the day?
um, the building of the team at Trigon has been really cool. It's been really fun, and yeah, there's ups and downs, right? But learning how to own a business isn't just again about an Excel document, is it? It's about the people that you put into that business, and how you match those up with the clients that you're doing. And I'm really proud of Trigon being able to deliver projects that are £5 million construction value to £800 million construction value, and having the team that can go between those types of projects and learn from those different types of projects is really good, I think. And it's something that sets us apart, that we're not just siloed into one asset class. We are across all of the asset classes you said at the start. All those different asset classes and different sizes, so that we can have our team can have experience across the various parts of development. And if they stay with us, great. Or if they go somewhere else, they've had that experience um, to be able to use in their future life.
And how easy do you think that is in terms of being a bit more agnostic to asset class? Because sometimes when we're working with a business and there's a real mix in the market right now, a clear split between single strategy focus and those that are a bit more agnostic. There's landed estates, family offices, maybe REITs can be a bit more um, sector agnostic, location specific, whereas a lot of the operating partners now are single strategy. Um, some people would say when they're going to hire that they need to have experience of a certain asset class. How easy do you think that's been for you and others that you've worked with to pick up?
Um, it's a really interesting question, and I don't think it has a definitive answer. I think that the fundamental development are the same. You have to understand two things really. What's your end user? So is that end user for sale residential, or is it a tenant for your industrial scheme? And two, what's the exit for the client? So how is this client exiting this building or this development? Are they creating a portfolio and exiting after 5 years? Are they holding for the foreseeable future, or are they trying to sell straight away? And if you can understand those two things properly, and that we spend quite a bit of time at the start of projects trying to work that out with the client, you can brief the development through, and then you use a specialist's through. You wouldn't use an industrial architect necessarily for a a high risk building safety act residential scheme. Um, but once you've worked out the general strategy at the start, you can select that specific team to go deliver it out. Um, I like the fact that our guys have got experience across different asset classes, because you can bring that experience of going through the gateways in a residential scheme to actually properly briefing quickly and understanding exactly how to brief the design team on an industrial scheme, and therefore you're creating um, an efficient design team and an efficient way of getting that site onto site, getting that building onto site, and getting out.
Nice. That all makes sense. I guess touched on this a little bit along the way, both in your own experience and a little bit there. But what, having been a development professional and still being a development professional, hiring a team, working with others, I think we all know that it takes lots of different backgrounds. I know the Trigon team come from lots of different backgrounds, skill sets, cultures, nationalities. But what are the key facets that you think are the golden thread that run through those people, and what makes a successful development professional in today's market, would you say?
Um, yeah, secret sauce. I'd love to have the exact recipe for it, but I think the biggest thing is curiosity, and understanding that you don't know everything. Um, that's huge, right? If you understand that there are things to learn and you're curious about what you're learning, um, you can be you're so much better as a development professional, because it changes so quickly. If you look at the residential sector, the co-living sector that's coming out the back of it, that's changing so quickly. The level of amenity we're putting into things, or not putting into things at the moment, and the size of units and what we're doing with them, you're learning so quickly from the data and from the understanding of the professionals. You've got to be curious all the time. So I think that's probably the biggest thing, and then trying to be holistic, understanding your development properly, understanding the other people's viewpoints. You don't necessarily have to agree with people's viewpoints, but you can understand where they're coming from. Um, I think is a big thing. Um, from our side, we have to manage a team really well, and being able to understand why they're drawing something a certain way. It allows you to have a conversation about it, and move it on in different ways.
Do you think that differs between a development manager and a project manager in your experience in terms of what makes a good one? Is it exactly what you've just said, or are there, is it a little bit more nuanced than that?
It's a little bit more nuanced. The development manager, I think, generally will set the brief a lot more. We'll think about a lot more about financial appraisals, and think about where the funding's coming from. Maybe think about party wall, how we're going to actually get this development going. And that project manager is really driving performance in the team. Um, and driving the brief, right? So the development manager might set the brief, that project manager driving that brief. So there's a few there are a couple of different nuances in between the two of them. Both are hugely important in a scheme, in my opinion. And it's interesting moving. Some of our team want to move from project to development management and try to change those skill sets. Is interesting. Yes, and it's constantly evolving your skill set then into that space.
So maybe the core behaviors stay similar, which is that curiosity, and maybe there's a degree of that conscious incompetence. So knowing what you don't know and being inquisitive to go and find it out, and better understanding, like you said, who is the end user? What are we trying to achieve here? How do we work backwards from a business plan rather than program? And then, that better enables someone to make decisions along the way in terms of commercial decision rather than just one based on time. Like understanding what the client's trying to achieve, you could suggest something that makes the build cost more, but actually rents go up and therefore business plans still achieved or overachieved.
Clear. It's achieving the brief, right? And if you're curious enough about the brief and ask enough questions about the brief, or where's the money coming from, or how are you exiting, or you can, as a project manager, really give so much more value for the cost for a project manager by understanding that piece a lot better, and then be able to talk in the same language or use metrics that you're talking about with the developer or the development manager that are relevant to the way the scheme is being delivered. Otherwise, it's just, as you say, we need to go. Or maybe if we're holding this for a long time, that capex can go higher, so the opex is a bit less as you're holding it.
Makes sense. And I'm often talking to people in this world about their career goals and what the next step is. And my advice is always around, firstly, put your hand up and ask for more, or be curious and go and seek out a chance to learn. People that are further on that journey, take them for a coffee, go to a client meeting. These are the things that sometimes people miss. It can sometimes be those that have worked with a smaller developer or smaller investor with a leaner team, therefore they get a bit more of a say and a bit more brought in as part of the team, that get some of that earlier stage fed into them. So if someone's stuck working with a larger client, sometimes that can hold them back because they're they're part of a process rather than being let in on what the process is. Are there any mistakes that you see people make in their career navigating that world of project management, development management, that you just wish they wouldn't?
Yeah, there's there's a few. I imagine. The biggest one I think is, this is going to sound daft, but assuming people know what they're talking about and not asking a follow-up question. So if someone's told you an answer that you, in your mind, you're thinking, I'm not sure, but if that's what they've said, that's what they've said. Like, ask the follow-up question, because someone's going to ask you that follow-up question. And if you don't ask that follow-up question, you're never going to really understand the why behind things. And yeah, if you assume people know what they're talking about, generally there's a lot of assumptions that are made in development that really hurt you down the line. And if you can get to the bottom of at least some of them by asking that follow-up question, then you're doing better than other people are at the moment.
It's that inquisitiveness.
Yeah, ask that follow-up question. If you don't fully understand why they're saying it, then there must be a reason why you're not understanding it. So ask that question. Ask why. Ask the next question in the process. Ask what you think your boss would ask you, and just try and be a bit more, curious and inquisitive at that point.
I think that's really sound advice. And I think sometimes it's pride that gets in the way. There's a real skill in actually potentially knowing the answer, but asking the question like you don't, and just hearing it from someone's view, because they might be coming at it from a completely different viewpoint, assuming that they're going to give an answer that fits with your world, or that you're even going to understand what they're talking about.
Yeah.
I've learned that lesson many times in real estate.
Yeah, what you want to hear is, it's a horrible thing, isn't it? You don't want to be told what you want to hear. You want to be told what the truth is, even if it's a problem. At least you'd know about it at that point.
Yeah, one of my coaches that I worked with used to call that happy ears. So your ears are happy, so therefore they will hear what they want to hear rather than the truth. And sometimes you've got to go looking for bad news. If you can't find it, you're in a really good place, but you've got to go looking for it, and don't just naively brush over it. James, appreciate you've had a really successful career from site into development to now running a business. There must be lots to, as you say, growing the team, making you proud, lots of different projects. Have you ever thought about, if you didn't have a successful career in development, what you might have done instead?
Yeah, I used to play a lot of sport when I was growing up, and I think being involved in elite sport would have been incredible. And I think if I'd have known back when I was 18 or so about the data in sports science and the process in sports science and those marginal gains that people are doing a huge amount of work in, I think I'd have really enjoyed being part of that growth. If you think about what the last 20 years of elite sport has achieved, um, with the guys that are behind the scenes actually helping the athletes do what the athletes do, it would be a really amazing place to be. So yeah, I think being part of that would have been a great place to have worked.
Yeah, that I personally can relate to that too. It's a bit like scouting for data. There's some similarities there. Marginal gains and tweaking the dials and analyzing is a lot like running a business, right? And growing a team. It's just, a development team rather than a sports team. In football, unfortunately, it means that no one now shoots from outside the box. So there is a slight downside to having too much data, but it's a fascinating evolution. And at some point, it might swing back the other way.
Same as rugby when they started kicking constantly, because that's where you had to be as part of the pitch. But yeah, it's not
Play
necessary.
the
You still got to
percentages.
have the ball to score, right? But anyway,
And on top of what you've already shared, which I think there's lots of really good lessons in there for those listening, whether they're senior or just starting out on their career, that staying curious, that inquisitiveness, that, trying to understand the viewpoint of others. What else, if you were to sit down for a coffee with an 18-year-old James, navigating his life, thinking about what the future may hold, or thinking about, what to do with himself, what would your other lessons be to your younger you?
I was thinking about that, and what I would tell my younger self, if I could. And I think just got to like stop being obsessed by career milestones. I was obsessed by career milestones. I must be promoted. I must be doing something to get promoted. How do I move up the ladder? Um, you can't be experienced, right? If you are getting experience of different types of whatever industry you're in, of different types of in real estate, buildings and different ways of building and different teams, and understanding how you can lead those teams in different ways with different types of people in it. That's so valuable, and will help you so much as you go into your later years of your career. Um, Being obsessed with a title really isn't the answer. Actually, just learning from people and learning how to lead teams from people is really important.
And then the progression will happen.
Yeah, of course, right? You're absolutely right, because because you're not trying to go too quickly, you'll go quicker later, if that makes sense. You'll have learned so much more in that process, and don't don't be worried about that one step up. It's understanding how much better you'll be when you're 5 steps up, and you'll get there pretty similarly, because at some point you'll get found out, and just by jumping a career ladder you'll get found out. But if you've waited and you're more rounded, you'll smash it and you get there.
Yeah, I'd reinforce that. Those that attach their happiness or their career success to a title or salary, you can never have one big enough, and you'll always find ways to absorb it and then look for the next thing. I've known people that have moved for salary and still 6 months later not be happy because they haven't actually worked out what drives them or what fulfills them. Especially when you get to our age, you start families, and those things come into play. How you think changes, maybe to a bit more about what do I enjoy, what do I What will I get out of bed to do? What fulfills me? What's my legacy? And how can I balance that with other things in life that are important? So I think that's really solid advice. It's hard to tell people to be patient because you don't always know what you don't know. And if I tell that to my 18-year-old self, they would have said, yeah, okay, of course.
Yeah, all right, old man. Thanks very much. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. I've got 20 years to work this out. So fast forwarding to today, and I'm sure within the four walls of Trigon, you're sharing some of these journeys when you're sitting down in your recruiting, hiring, onboarding, progressing the team. Could you talk to those that are a little bit less familiar about the business? Could you share a bit more about um, what you're up to, what excites you, what the current mission is? Yeah, and then we'll maybe touch on the wider market.
Yeah. So we are working across multiple different projects at the moment. So we've got some last mile logistics in central London, which are really exciting projects, really fast paced, um, really interesting, trying to create new, efficient last mile logistics and industrial schemes on generally some pretty old and gnarly projects in horrible little tucked away corners. So they've got pretty much everything that a project manager would need to achieve to get these things going, and you've got to get them going quickly. The client is based on an IRR calc, and therefore time is money really quickly. So they're really interesting schemes, and really really they get you. They get every day is different on those schemes, and then the guys get so much brain power doing those stuff. We've got some high risk residential, so we're in gateways at the moment on with the Building Safety Act. That's a very different kind of project. Trying to navigate our way through those is tricky. And again, trying to get to a point where you really understand the multidisciplinary team and how they're looking at your scheme. Theoretically it's easy, right? You're just submitting a design to show you've achieved building regs before you start building, but it's because building regs are so it's based on a box design, and there's so many variables in your design going forward. How are you applying those building regs to your buildings? Really interesting, and trying to talk through that with the design team into a place that you can get it signed off is tricky, and hard, and takes time, but takes precision. And then we've got big master plans we're working on, scheme that's around £800 million construction cost is in planning at the moment. That's exciting. That's 70-story towers that we're trying to work things out, and you start talking to wind engineers and how you're affecting the wind at ground floor with your terraces up on the 70 something floor. It's quite an interesting part of the building, and then trying to really understand how people will use that space and how do we get them through some of these master plans is interesting. You start talking to architects that have looked at tube underground designs and how they're moving people um, through spaces is really interesting, actually, and changes your mindset on some stuff that you've got. And then we've got some assurance roles that we're doing, helping government where they've got a development on site, or not quite on site. Sorry, it's going through design that we're helping them out with. And there's a few other bits and pieces on the back of that as well. There's some extra care homes that we're working with a council and a development partner to create affordable extra care, which is really really exciting project, and the kind of stuff that really helps people living in their own flat, but they can ratchet up care and support need if they need to. And these people that we're moving into those are people um, that are on that 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 are in council housing, that we can move into these spaces, release the council housing for new families. This is quite nice projects to be involved with, really. So yeah, various different things from development management to project management, with various size and different types of schemes as well.
And I think you've summed up beautifully what makes development such a brilliant career. So much variety. I always think about the fact that essentially all of these businesses are trying to predict human behavior. So when you're looking at creating a place, as you said earlier, thinking about who's actually going to use it. And all those examples, it'll be a different type of person. It might be where they work, it might be for logistics, it might be where they live, it might be where they need extra help to try and give them a better place to make their life better. But I guess you're starting with a piece of land and you're trying to bet on what is the best use for it. And then, competitive market, trying to create a place where people will ultimately want to spend time. Otherwise, the value is not going to be there. So it's quite a fascinating process for those that are thinking about it as a career or are a part of that design team that want to come to be the quarterback or the conductor, as someone said recently, of the orchestra.
Yeah, it's important to protect the value of the asset you're building, right? And how are you protecting that value when you either release it to someone else to take guardianship of that project going forward, or maybe you have to refinance it at some point, and you're protecting the value by making sure you future proof that you're climate resilient. You're, as you say, you're really understanding the people that are going to use that space, so they want to use that space in the future and want to use your space more than the space down the road, maybe.
On the sustainability piece, I know you said earlier about using ESG to unlock finance, using sustainability to drive value. It feels like over the last couple of years with Trump and a few other key voices in the world, that perhaps has taken a step back from the front of the agenda. How important is that still, and what do you think makes it still worth? I mean, we know why it's important at a world level, but where does it sit in real estate, and what are you guys doing around that?
I think it's I think it's moved a hell of a long way in 5 years. I think it's generally business as usual. I think the ESG isn't that we're not talking about it at every meeting because it's already baked in. There's an awful lot of work that's already happening, and the truth is, who wouldn't want a climate resilient building that's energy efficient, that's clearly sensibly going to be ready to be sold in 10 years time, and be able to be sold without a discount because someone's expecting to have to do some retrofit to create a position that's in a better place. So it's the conversations we're having are it's financially sensible to be building a sustainable building, because when your exit point is whatever that exit is, you're trying to protect the value of your scheme, right? And if you can create a position where it's not getting, I hate the words, but a brown discount, I'm not sure there's a green, what's the opposite of
Premium.
a green premium? Yeah, I'm not sure there's a green premium at the moment. Maybe I'm quite happy to have a conversation with people about it, but there'll certainly be a brown discount in 10 years' time if you don't produce a building that's resilient to where it needs to be when you're releasing it, because people will have to spend money on your asset, and therefore they'll discount it off the back of that. So I think we are getting a lot better about designing sustainability into our buildings. There's fiscal rules that a lot of funds have that mean that they have to, and they're mandated to. So yeah, I'm not sure it's quite as I think. So I think it is. I think real estate is moving in that direction already.
That's good to hear. And maybe some of the green premium comes if you've got two similar buildings and one of them is going to cost you less to live in because the energy is more efficient. But as you say, you just don't want to bring in anything that's going to shut the market to potential exit down the line. So it's important, not just for the social purpose, but also commercial reasons.
And then that's exactly right. I think about 7 or 8 years ago, people were saying, yeah, we want to be green, but maybe next project, it's costing a bit of money, or maybe next project. Now people are realizing that is just what we have to do now. We have to, and it's not just a social thing. It's not just I want to be a good person. It's I have to protect the value of this scheme going forward. And look, especially in the leasing type projects, so PRS, where you're looking to sell that money into a pension fund or office or industrial, you those tenants are expecting to be built to be living or working or using a building that has those credentials. Um, so I'm not fully convinced about just getting a badge for a badge name. So a Briama neighbours are fit well, but you do need to think about what your tenants are expecting, and then you effectively create the most sustainable building you can, and have a badge that your tenants are going to want to see.
Yeah, those badges make it a bit more tangible and maybe easier to understand for people that aren't in it every day. But yeah, going back to the human behavior piece in a competitive market for talent, if you're an office occupier, part of what attracts people to come and work for you and stops them leaving is how good that space is in terms of your mental health, your wellness, the end of journey facilities, how sustainable it is, natural light, climate, all of these things. That some of them are hard to touch and measure in terms of just sentiment and happiness. But I'm glad that it's still very important. So we know that development is challenging. We know the market has some challenges. We know growing a business is definitely challenging. Um, you're doing all three. When you look out into the market over the next few years, what excites you most about what's coming down the line, either personally or through the lens of Trigon?
I think I think it's interesting. You're right. It's really development's really hard at the moment. There's the amount of shocks we've had in the last 10 years are outrageous, right? Brexit, COVID, um, the interest rate spikes, the inflation, land wars in Europe, the Iran issues at the moment, all the political uncertainty around at the moment. It's and the regulatory change in the last 10 years. It's really really hard. Um, so I think the exciting things are there's quite a bit of partnership work, and it seems to be coming through on this. So people maybe who have land, and they need someone to come and help them unlock that, or people who can unlock things and don't necessarily have the land. So there's some interesting partnership working that's coming through, which will help share some of those skill sets, and then obviously that'll create better skills going forward, which is really interesting. Um, and I'm excited that there does feel like there's some understanding from central government or from local government, so GLA for instance, who are um, understanding this tricky at the moment to convince capital to invest in UK real estate, um, and therefore they're showing that actually the GLA are looking at the moment at changing some of the rules around affordable housing and some of um, the SIL on schemes to see if we can get building again. Can we create a position where the risk of real estate, the capital is getting some money back for taking that risk? Because fundamentally, at the minute, it's really hard to convince capital to do anything in UK real estate. And if we don't build, it's slightly tangential, but if we don't build private for sale houses or PRS houses, we don't build affordable homes. We've got public sector need, so affordable homes being delivered by the private sector, and if the private sector are building, that those affordable homes are never going to get built. So there does need to be something that helps development make it more viable to build. Otherwise, nothing gets done, right? So that partnership bit is not just, I think, between landowner and developer and trying to work through unsticking some sites, but it's also with then local and central government to try and work out what levers can we really move to help capital come into the UK.
Yeah, and with UK Reef next week, I think it's quite a poignant topic, really, a place where the public and private sector are in the same space. And I think that's what a lot of people seem to like about the event is that public sector councils are actually there in person in 3D, can be met, presenting and almost selling their area as somewhere that's a bit more pro partnerships. I know you guys are running some sessions while you're up there. Could you touch a little bit more about what you're looking to get out of that? And does that fit neatly into what we've discussed?
Yeah, we're hosting we're hosting a roundtable that it's a slightly provocative title of essentially, can we deregulate? How do we deregulate? What can we do to move real estate on? And is deregulation a nasty word that actually we need to actually start doing and start thinking about. And that was born out of the premise that actually, if we decided as a country we've signed up to the Paris Agreement, therefore we're going to be carbon neutral by 2050, and we're going to ensure that we don't we don't do things that we need that will harm the climate. Well, if that's the thing we've decided to do, that's what we should make real estate prove that they're doing, right? And we shouldn't try and layer regulation on regulation on regulation on regulation on regulation. We should try and keep it so much cleaner, and therefore be able to be in a place where we say, right, go develop, but just show us what you're doing to make sure that we're carbon neutral by 2050, or that we don't do any harm um, to these 6 areas that were really important to us. And if we can do that, you change the dial, right? You get innovation, you get different developers doing different things, and you get to a point where you're not saying no, you can't do that. You're saying you can do whatever you want, so long as it's within these schemes. Now, it's a tricky idea to sell, right? But what do you want? Safe buildings that aren't harming the environment. Well, how do we create a place that enables that to work at the moment without just putting layer on layer on layer on regulation, which is what it feels like has happened, and what is starting to hurt development at the moment. All of these regulations are from a positive position, right? How do we create better biodiversity? How do we create more cycling to work? How do we create? They're all interesting. They're all sensible things to be thinking about. But the problem is, at the minute, they start to, because they've been laid on top of each other, they start to pull each other in different ways, and it's very tricky to get through that. Whereas actually, if you can say, this is the one clear brief you've got, go do this, show us how you can do this, I think that'd be a really interesting way to move forward.
So what excites you most is the public sector, private sector coming together to drive some of the narrative change and getting on the same page. I guess the industry feels like it's got a bit of a reputational problem where making money through developing can sometimes be seen as a bad thing. Actually, I think a lot of people are quite frustrated that clearly there's a lot of win-wins here. It's better for everyone if some of this stuff happens. I don't think many people are frustrated with regulation in its kind of sentiment. A lot of it is done for exactly the right reasons. We don't want an unregulated market, but if you'd have spoke to the other department or the last person, or looked at that before you brought the new one in, or maybe spoke to the private sector about its feedback and how that could be made happen, or layered in, or given a bit more of a process, then everything would be happening a bit faster. So I guess if we're in a more challenging place right now, with next week in mind and with the coming months in mind, I guess we've done a few sessions recently where we've called out the industry to try and change the narrative, put their opinion forward, call out the naysayers. Maybe that's the opportunity we should all be excited about, and a chance to play our part in that.
Yeah, it's hugely the real estate development in the UK is providing such positivity. The the amount of Section 106 payments that go to public transport, or go to creating a park, or go to creating play space, that wouldn't be there without the development of the building next door, is was massive. And our town centres desperately need regeneration, right? Otherwise, they just become hollowed out shells. People don't want that. People still want to be able to go into their town centre and enjoy spending time there. Without regeneration, without real estate sector pulling together with the public sector, it doesn't happen. And yeah, and it's not. We should be better at having a positive story about development than a negative story about development.
And that cycle then starts to unlock, and everyone becomes a little bit more excited.
Yeah, exactly, 100%.
So probably a poignant moment to ask the question from the last guest, which is tradition on the podcast. So Jonathan Smales from Human Nature asked the following, which I think fits in neatly with what we've just been talking about. So he asked James, how do we transform innovation in our space, not just gradual evolution, but in terms of a transformative step change in terms of innovation when it comes to placemaking. So, nice, easy question for you to answer. How do we do that?
Yeah, I listened to the podcast, and crikey, when I heard that question, I thought that was a curveball to whoever had to answer it, and I realised it's me who has to answer it. Yeah, it's I think you have to incentivize the behaviour you want. So you have to try and create. I'm not giving practical decisions here. I'm not convinced there is a practical point here, but you have to, if you incentivize the behavior you want, you have to create a credit and a regulatory marker, I think, that incentivizes innovation. And at the minute, that regulatory market for where we are, for good or bad, doesn't incentivize innovation, because you're trying, especially in Building Safety Act world with high risk buildings, you're having to prove what you're building is ticking that regulatory box. You're not able to be innovative in that position because you can't have that conversation going forward. And at that point, you're ticking you're ticking time on your IRR calc, and therefore you need to crack on and get onto site early. And credit's the same, right? That there's quite a lot of, not all, very clearly, but there are some credit houses that like things in their silos because they understand that risk, and they've done that before. They understand what the risk is for lending into that space, and then are quite happy with that spot. So you're not innovating. So it would be interesting to work out a way where, like we just said before, where we're more open, and we set broader train tracks that we will try and stay inside of, but that would allow us to be more innovative in what we're doing, and really work through the next few phases of development. So yeah, not really a practical answer, I don't think, but it's trying to incentivize that as opposed to be incentivize the same, which is what we're doing at the moment, I feel.
I think it's a good point. You look at some other sectors and that they will incentivize innovation by tax credits, in R&D, technology. We are in competition with other nations when it comes to tech and AI, and there's lots of incentives there. Perhaps there's a degree of making some of the other stuff a bit more straightforward, so therefore less hard work, and therefore giving people a bit of thinking time back, because at the moment most people I speak to are working hard to make things viable, make things stack, sometimes feel like they're pushing uphill a little bit, and therefore maybe not the time that they used to have to think creatively or be a bit rebellious, just have to stick to the plan. So maybe it's a bit of both, but thanks for that. And in return, did you want to leave a question for the next guest to answer to get your own back?
Definitely, yeah, absolutely. I'm really excited actually at the moment about how materials will change and what materials we're going to use in the future, and how we can use regenerative materials going forward, or biomaterials, not just timber. We're using timber at the minute, and some really interesting schemes that are going forward with that, but actually other things, bacteria-based concrete that self-heals itself, mycelium from roots of fungus, and hempcrete, using bamboo for reinforcing concrete. So there's really interesting things we're looking at the moment. So I suppose my question is, when future generations, I suppose, look back at today's construction industry, what materials or building practices do you think they'll see as fundamentally outdated, and what regenerative building materials, except mass timber, do you think will be the material of the future?
If you have a crystal ball.
Yeah, exactly right. What are we going to be building with in 50 years' time that we're not building with now?
And I love these big questions because sometimes we get caught up in the day to day.
Yeah.
Sometimes it takes a big question like that on a commute to set your mind thinking about the bigger problems. We've had quite a few on the podcast already. Remember episode 1, David Partridge asked, what's the biggest problem in your sector that you could impact, and why aren't you spending all your time on it? It does get you thinking.
Yeah, exactly.
So thanks for sharing that. And amongst the day-to-day making things happen, growing a business, pushing developments forward, hopefully we can all spend a little bit of time thinking about the future and making our industry a better place to be for those that come after us.
Definitely,
So thank
yeah.
you, James. Really great to share your journey. Thanks for taking time out of your busy day. And I hope those that have tuned in have enjoyed. I certainly have.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. It's been really interesting.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode. Your support means the world. Please feel free to like, share, or pass the podcast on to a friend or colleague. Do drop me a line with any suggested topics you'd like us to cover on future episodes and recommendations of guests that you would love to see us interview. Till next time, go well.